Hello, and welcome to Crafts and Crime. I'm Amy.
I'm Elaine.
And today we have a craft and a crime.
Who would have thought?
I know.
Yay!
So
We did it.
Yeah, we did. We do it
the last minute.
Yeah.
Every time.
And that is how we were just talking about that. That's how we got through like school.
Always. Forever.
That's how I got through college.
With really good grades.
Yeah.
But just, I don't know. I think it's always really good grades. I'm like, well, I just studied for this test this morning on the walk to school.
It's fresh in my mind.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
too much for me. There's something about that sweet panic-induced homework.
I know. I work best under pressure. Not all the time, but
Like this
sometimes.
kind.
Yeah, this kind.
It's
I'm like,
very-
I could do this like really easily. Yeah, that's how I got through college. It would be like, hey, this is due. Like I had assignments due. I think it was on like Mondays and Fridays or so. I can't remember. It's been a long time. It's been over 5 years. And and I would do it like the day of.
Yeah.
And I would power through. I'd get it done in like 30 minutes. And then like an essay would be due on like Saturday and I would finish it like Saturday.
Oh.
Like I'd start on it Friday and finish it Saturday. And yeah, I got the best grades when I did that. When I did stuff in advance, it was like I think I overthought it. So
I guess so. And you're always wanting to revise. Like,
yeah.
You're reading it over and over. Like, oh, that sounds like crap.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that very much. But
yeah. So
yep,
we were
that's
kind of
how we
laughing
roll.
because it's Tuesday, and I think from now on our new recording days are going to end up being like Tuesdays
and Fridays.
Because the weekend, it's like I don't want to
hard.
do anything over the weekend. Sometimes if like Jack's off doing stuff, then it's like fine for me to not record, but like do stuff and study.
See, Kurt was home this weekend. I was like, I don't want to do my homework.
Yeah.
He never has Saturdays off.
Yeah,
So it was
true.
cool.
Oh yeah, that's when the guy came for the rooster, right? Was that Saturday?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's gone.
I miss him though. He was so nice
you
to
can
me.
take Bambi.
I don't want him.
I don't want him.
I have no relationship with your rooster.
I don't know.
Oh my God. Join us for Mommy's After Hours if you want to hear some horrific, ridiculous, crazy chicken people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Did you
conversations.
screenshot like the
I
whole
did.
thing?
I did.
Okay.
I can like crop out her name and stuff. But she was hilarious. Oh my God. That whole conversation was funny. But.
It's animal people are weird. But we're animal people. So, I mean, but animal people, I should say, can be weird. And some people go a little over the top. And like, even in the chicken group, it's like, there are people that have chickens for all different reasons. So
for sure.
Yeah. Don't say that, oh, because you raise meat birds that you're a bad chicken owner. No, it's like, you're a
farmer.
A farmer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think your chicken strips come from when you go to Chick-fil-A?
Exactly. It's the same. Like, I was explaining to my husband because he's like so sweet and sad about we eat chicken a lot.
Yeah, we do
but
too.
Mine are just for pets. They're pets. I actually don't even like eggs.
Yeah, mine are multi-purpose.
Yeah, multi-purpose. And I don't really like eggs. Lenore does a lot. Kurt doesn't. But we will eat them in recipes. So that's
oh my
okay.
Gosh.
So I got to find like egg-based stuff.
My kids will eat eggs every day if I let them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Lily, I mean, you saw when I hard-boiled the quail egg, she was popping them like M&Ms.
Popcorn, yeah.
Yeah,
They really are like,
oh.
yes. It is really funny, but yeah, so and so a lot of people, I guess they just figured it was a group just for pet owners.
Yeah.
It's what is it, Backyard Chickens on Facebook?
Chickens.
It's open to everybody. I think it's like worldwide. I think a lot of people there are, oh my God, sorry. Did you see that woman's Indio Gigante rooster?
The giant one that's like
Holy
3 feet
crap,
tall or something
yes.
like that? Yeah.
And he's not even done growing. She says they don't stop growing till they're a few years old and they can get 4 feet tall.
That's crazy.
That's
like my child.
Freakish. That is so scary. Like looking at Feline when I crouched down, I was like, God, they're big. These are big
Feline's
birds.
big, though.
She's the biggest. But
yeah,
it's really weird because it's like unless you see a crow right up close, you don't realize how big they are.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it never occurred to me that, like, because I grew up in Oregon and I had chickens once before. I don't think I knew anyone personally as a kid that had chickens besides me. But like our fairs were like county fairs. And, you know, we're talking, there's more animals than anything else at the fair. Yeah. You know, and it was exciting. And quilts and cakes and jellies, like that kind. Even it was in the, I believe the fair in Oregon, in Salem, is the Marion County Fair. Who knows? When I was a kid, I was like, let's go to the fair. Because it was always mine and my sister's birthdays. So, like, I miss
here it's
that.
The San Bernardino County Fair.
But there's, like, the animal paddock is, like, one cow and, like, a couple pigs. I haven't been in
forever, since I was, like, a kid.
It's cute, but it's gotten really, really small.
I know they have one out in L.A.
Oh my God, I want to go to the L.A. County Fair so bad. Supposedly, it's like the biggest fair on the West Coast.
Yeah, we should do it sometime.
We totally should.
When, like,
because
Lincoln Valley are a little bigger.
The thing is, like, it's in September for a month. It's like the end of September and the first half of October.
It still is just so hot.
And it does. It does get so hot, but it's just like, at least it's not the orange show hot.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's really bad too.
Oh yeah.
And LA tends to be a little cooler because it's more coastal.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I've driven past it, I think, on the
really?
freeway. Yeah, because, you know, my parents have the house down in Newport. Yeah. So, like, driving to Newport Beach, it's like, I think there was a fair. I'm like, I don't know if it was that one, but the Orange County Fair.
Someday when when the little ones are older, then we got to do a road trip to one of those fun county fairs. Because, like, California, we have, like, the most produce. I know there's, like, a garlic festival somewhere. Like, there
my gosh, I love it when we would, like, drive. Not like I know there's a lavender one. Oh, and then there's, like, but anyways, when you said garlic, I was like, on the freeway when I would drive the kids home from dance, we would always end up behind a garlic truck, and you could totally smell it. And I'm like, I love it.
I know.
It's like a big semi truck full of garlic, like open.
It looks like a dump truck.
Yeah, it's like open.
I think it is a dump
but it's like
truck.
the mesh sides. Well, not mesh, but like the metal, you know, where you could see
like
through.
cattle guard.
Yeah, well, like the security screen kind of material, so you could see all of the garlic, because it's always like, is that onion or is that garlic? It's like, it's garlic.
Yeah.
So
I do love those trucks because, again, like, I lived right down the street from a giant onion farm growing up as a kid. So when the onions were ready, the whole town smelled like armpit because I was right downwind from it.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a dairy city, or next to a dairy city.
This is why we have chickens in our backyard.
And it was so funny because on Saturday when Brad and his friend came over, he helped me push the pool up because we got, like, the little blow up pool thing, you know, and it's like it's pretty big. It's about like 10 feet across, maybe, or 8 feet. I think
it's 8.
Yeah. And so I had emptied it already, but it had like that little bit of water in the bottom, and so Brad was like, here, I'll help you, like,
were you
get
doing, like,
it
a full
out.
clean?
Yeah, I had to.
Did you flood your backyard?
No, I just did the little drain thing, so it was slow enough, and I just didn't throughout the day. It was so hot that day. It was like 105 or something like that.
God, that sucks because it's like, it's so much water.
It
it's
is, but it was so
too.
gross. It was slimy. Yeah. Everything was slimy. So we emptied it, and then
still use it on plants.
Well, but it flooded my backyard
it
does have chlorine in it.
The chlorine, it would have evaporated, but it would have been like, take the ducky chlorine thing out,
yeah,
and then let it rot longer.
So he helped me move that, and then I pulled the tarp up, and it was like decomposing grass underneath, and it smelled. Me and Brad both at the same time were like, it smells like home. Because it smells like manure,
like the
cows.
Cow fart.
Yeah,
smell. I totally know what you mean. And if you have not lived near a nice clean poop cow farm, you don't know. It's not like driving through Stockton or like it's a nice
it's nice
grass poop smell, and you can't, it sounds crazy, but
natural smell. It's a very organic, natural.
It smells
smell.
like fresh cut grass and nice compost. I don't know.
But
unless you've smelled it, you're like, nice cow shit smell.
Yeah,
but
it's like
it really
weird
is.
Because I lived with my friend Alicia, and she lived like literally on a dairy, like cows are right there, and so I know that smell pretty fresh from her house, and it wasn't nasty. It's just like you get used to it. Yeah. But it's very organic and natural. So it was funny. It was like, it smells like home. Me and Brad were both at the same time. And his friend was like, what? Never mind. It's
I
nice.
know. Yeah, Crystal and we grew up next to a farm in Oregon for just a little while, the first handful of years of my life till I was like 5. And it was a very small farm. Comparatively, I think it was just like maybe 10 acres, and it was only like a couple dozen cows on that property. So they were pretty spread out. But that smell, I just know it, and it just like, it's so familiar, and it's funny because unless you like know that poop smell, you're like, well, it just is.
And some days it would be like worse than others, like when they would till up the ground and stuff, and you're like, oh, it's fresh today.
Because it's the decomposing poop. That's the gross smell. It's the poop that's rotten.
I remember when my mom had first rented out the house in Ontario, the tenants had moved from they weren't from that area, and the first thing they said was like, oh my gosh, you didn't tell us that the cow poop smell was so bad. And my mom kind of had to tell them, like, well, you did rent out a house like streets away from cows. What did you think?
That's crazy.
So
like they didn't even check the property out before.
No, they did. It just wasn't a stinky day.
It wasn't a fart day.
No.
Oh my god.
So
hilarious.
Anyways.
All the cows were farting at the same time.
Yeah. They're like, oh, we got some new people in town.
That's so
welcome
funny.
them. But so it smelled like home, and it's cute. It's funny because like I kind of like that smell because it does. It's nostalgic.
I get it.
Yeah. Anyways, enough chit chat about.
At least it wasn't animals. Chickens this whole time. It was cow poop.
Yeah. Well, we once again talked about chickens a lot. I did. That's why I shared it in the group, because I was like, come and listen to us talk about chickens every time.
We really do. It's literally in our hashtags on Instagram because of how much we talk about chickens. I was like, well, let's see if this is our crowd too.
I know. Well,
all right. Let me hear your craft.
Yeah. I was like, welcome to Crafts, Crime, and Chickens. Okay. So I got a little one. And it kind of ties in, like I was vaguely trying to tell you without telling you. I'm like, it vaguely ties into like other crafts that I've done. Okay. So I am doing sewing needles. So the history of sewing needles.
No, that's crazy. So that's cool.
Just something simple. Yeah. It's super short.
I never would have thought, but I love it.
Yeah, I know. I was like, maybe I'll do sewing. And I was like, no, we'll take it
because again, deeper. You and I talk about this all the time. We've mentioned it here. These are things I've used. I've known how to hand sew since I was like 4. Not great, but I was so jealous watching my sister like hand sew like stuffed animals and stuff. But when have I ever Googled when sewing needles came around? You just don't. And I love this. Like, this is like, we could so win Jeopardy.
Yeah, give us a few years into the podcast and we'll know all the random facts.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Give me crafts for 500.
Oh.
Okay.
Extra bag.
I know.
It's so sad.
Okay. So obviously we all know what a sewing needle is and what we use it for, but I'm going to dive into a little more details and just simple stuff that, like, you know, it's just more information on sewing needles. So as we know, a sewing needle is a long, sharp piece of metal, and it has a small eye hole at the end in order to thread through some fiber of some sort. There are actually 6 parts to a sewing needle. I didn't know this.
That's cool.
So the main section is called the shaft, and the next part is called the shank. And the shank is the part that is attached to a sewing machine, or the part that is held to hand sew. So it's like the top part.
Okay.
Next is the groove, and the groove is a dent that runs along the shaft, and it allows for the thread to lie against the needle. So, like, it's a little line. If you look at a sewing needle, it'll have a little line for the thread to go through as it goes through the fabric. And the eye is the next part of the needle, and it is the hole near the tip of the needle that the thread is passed through. And the scarf is the next portion of the sewing needle, and it allows for the hook to form a stitch. And the last part of a sewing needle is the point. And as we know, the point is the tip of the needle, and that's what goes through the fabric. So that's like a lot of, think about a sewing machine. There's a lot of parts to like that needle, but just a needle in general, it's more than just like a pointy piece of metal with a hole in it, you know?
Yeah.
There's actual terminology for it. So there are many different types of needles for different uses. And the most common needle is the sharp needle. And that is just your basic needle to like sew a button, mend clothes, etc. It's just your basic needle. It's called a sharp. Applique needles are used for applying things to something, such as like a patch. And then there are embroidery needles, which are similar to sharp needles, but they have a bigger eye to accommodate more threads, like if you're doing multiple threads in embroidery work. So like a sharp needle might have a smaller hole, while embroidery will have a bigger eye hole. And then quilting needles are shorter and the eye is small and round, and these types of needles are used for what it sounds like, quilting and making detailed stitches, fine stitches.
Why are they shorter? Do you know?
Because you're making more detailed stitch. I don't know.
It's just so you need, so you don't need a long control.
Yeah, you need smaller control. Yeah, you're not trying to go through big pieces. You're trying to make detailed work on a small space on the quilt. So I'm not going to go into all the different types of needles because there are like 12 more different kinds. But those are kind of the most common ones. So like think of a project that needs a needle and it probably has its own needle, such as like there's needles for upholstery, even doll making. There's specific needles for that. Tapestries and leatherworking. Like these
those are huge.
Yeah,
they look like an arrow.
And so there's like just tons of different needles for any different project. There are even specific needles that are used in a sewing machine, and all of these needles come in different lengths and thicknesses. And so the needle I'm actually currently using for the cross stitch is like an embroidery needle, but it has like a blunt tip because I'm not trying to go through fabric.
You're not stabbing.
I'm not stabbing anything. I'm going through that hole.
So it needs to be smooth bullet tip to glide.
To go through the little hole in the cross stitch. So as I said in the cross stitch episode. So yeah, my needle doesn't need to be sharp, which is nice because could you imagine like trying to go through and like stab, you know, because I have hands usually on both sides of my work. So anyways, so the earliest sewing needles were made of bone and were most likely used to sew together animal skins. And a point that might be from a bone needle dates back to 61,000 years ago, and it was discovered in Sibudu Cave, South Africa. And a needle made from bird bone, and it was like back to the Denisovans. It's estimated to be around 50,000 years old.
Wow.
And then a bone needle dated about 47 to 41,000 years ago was discovered in Slovenia. And then bone and ivory needles found in, I don't know, Zayogushan prehistoric site, and I hate when I can't say the names. Liaoning province date between 30,000 and 23,000 years old. So we've
been sewing stuff forever.
Yeah.
Cool.
And ivory needles were also found dated 30,000 years ago in Russia. And then 8,600-year-old Neolithic needle bones were discovered in Western Anatolia. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
And then copper sewing needles were found in Egypt, ranging from like 4,400 BC to 3,000 BC. And then iron sewing needles were found dating back to the 3rd century BC. And so out here, we live in the United States, so North America. And Native Americans were known to use sewing needles from natural sources. And one such source was the agave plant. And that provided both the needle and the thread.
I love that.
Yeah. And so the agave leaf would be soaked for an extended period of time, leaving a pulp, long stringy fibers, and a sharp tin connecting the ends of the fibers. The needle is essentially what was the tip end of the leaf. And then once the fibers dried, the fibers and the needle could then be used to sew things together.
Because they're connected.
So, yeah. So in the 10th, here I said it's all short. And I'm like, I actually have a lot of information. In the 10th century, in Spain, there was like more high quality steel being produced. So then this later was extended to Germany and France and England. And then England began creating needles in 1639. And in about 1655, needle manufacturers were able to establish a guild of needle makers in London. And in Japan, the Festival of Broken Needles dates back to the 1600s. And so that's a little bit of like when needles started to become more produced. So then in the 19th century, needle production obviously amped up. Higher disposable incomes and different textiles and the introduction of the sewing machine really helped expand the, sewing market and needle market. And during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when these skills were like an essential part of a lady's education, you had to take sewing baskets, boxes, like other necessities were handed down from generation to generation. And my grandmother was a phenomenal sewer. I remember her little pincushion of all her needles and pins and stuff. And she was really good at making quilts. She, along with like other, I think it was like members of her church, did like a big quilt for my parents when they got married. And so she was really good at sewing. But yeah, so that's just a bit of on needles.
Super cool.
Sewing needles specifically. So yeah, and I thought about that because I was literally sitting down thinking like, what am I going to talk about as I'm like cross stitching with a needle? And I was like, wonder when this was invented.
It's funny too. As soon as you started mentioning it, my brain went, I bet you could use like a really dried out thick pine needle because they're so sharp. You like split it in the middle just a little bit because that's what beading needles are. They are like this super long split, and you put your filament in it, and then you scoop up all the beads.
Sorry, you could use like a cat whisker as a.
I'm serious. I kept thinking about it. And
like all these pokey things.
Yeah, there are so many options.
Just tie a knot at the end of the whisker to like thread another whisker through to sew with.
We'd be fine in the apocalypse.
Yeah, we're pretty resourceful.
I have a container of cat whiskers.
I know. I save them when I find them for you.
I found a really good one yesterday.
I know.
It's funny though because like the two cats are all white whiskers, so it's like a million white whiskers.
Yeah,
and I still haven't found a black one.
Binks has black whiskers, right? Yeah, and then Kiki has one white whisker.
It's so cute. It's like a freckle.
Her old lady white whisker.
It's so cute though. It's like her freckle. It's like her birthmark because she didn't have it forever, right?
No. She's 14, and in the last like year or so, all of a sudden she has one white whisker.
That's
it's
so
like
cute.
it is because it reminds me of my childhood cat, Cinder, and she was all black like Binks. And she, as she got old, she had one white whisker, and so when she died, we saved her white whisker. I think we found it not too long ago, but
I feel like you told me.
We found my boo-boo. My lock of hair my mom saved.
That's cute. My mom saved the hair too.
Yeah, I saved my kids' hair too.
Me too.
Okay, so that was needles.
That was super cool.
Yeah.
That was not short. My craft.
It was like 10 minutes.
My craft next week is short.
Okay.
Like way shorter than that.
Okay, well,
so you were like, it's short, and I'm like, girl.
Well, because then I got into dates, and I'm like, I gotta mention it all because it's like you're trying to think. I tried to go in order, but then I get all mixed up with BC and CE and all of that.
Yeah,
and it takes me a second to like, wait, I gotta look at that picture, that timeline in my brain. So, okay, so is your crime in the BC or the C?
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
My case is on Alfred Packer.
Okay.
He was born January 21st, 1842 in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which was really close outside of Pittsburgh. He had two siblings to his dad, James, and his mom, Esther. I don't have a lot of information on his parents or his early life because that wasn't, the part of this story.
And it was back in the 1800s.
Exactly, right. Hey, we were talking about journals. Everybody diaried. But I know. I don't have any information on diaried. In 1850, the parents moved from Pennsylvania to LaGrange, Indiana. And he didn't get along with his parents like most teenagers.
Yeah.
And so he moved in those late teenage years with a job as a shoemaker in Minnesota. He enlisted in the Civil War. It's so funny reading these. I was like, dang, That's crazy.
Yeah.
He enlisted in the Civil War 2 separate times. The first time in April of 1862 for 8 months. And then again the next year in June of 1863 until April of the next year. Okay. He got discharged both times medically because he had really severe epilepsy. Oh, and so even though they knew his first round, they still needed soldiers. So they basically let him enlist as long as he could. Mm-hmm. But he ended up having to leave the service because of he ended up having really terrible grand mal seizures every 2 days.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is, like, for people who don't know, like, seizures can on their own just knock you out for days or so and make you tired and loopy, and there's headaches. There's a lot more involved to just I had a seizure. So 9 years he worked so many jobs in that amount of time. And his epilepsy and a really terrible attitude got him let go from on all of his jobs. Everybody that encountered him said he was unliked, distrusted. He had light fingers, which is a nice way of saying he stole stuff.
Yep.
But I think it's like he stole stuff that they was pretty sure it was him. And he was just unliked and distrusted by people in general, and everybody just felt deep down in his core he was a bad person. He argued with everybody, and he was just completely impossible to even get along with. He didn't want to make friends. He didn't want to be nice. He was just insufferable. He worked as a guide, so like a through the forest kind of a guide.
Oh, okay.
But he was really bad at it.
Of course he was.
He was really bad at it, and he ended up getting people lost quite a lot. And I guess they assumed because he was a soldier that he was familiar with the area, but he wasn't at all. He tried to work in Colorado and Utah mining, which there was all kinds of mining. It didn't say. There's coal, salt, and gold out there, so it was one of those. But I don't think it was gold. I think it was salt
with his
or
light
coal.
fingers.
Right, exactly. In November of 1873, he came across 20 men that were going to Breckenridge, Colorado, from the salt mines in Utah. And they heard that there was gold over there because, the gold rush was starting on the West Coast, and it didn't just stay in California. They realized it was, Utah, Nevada, all of it. Because it was in the area from the mountain water.
Yeah.
So he asked them, the head of that group, George Tracy, said that he found them about 25 miles from where they had first started their trip in Utah. So not very far. They had a long way to go from Utah to that part in Colorado. So they had just started when he found them.
Okay.
And Alfred asked to join them. And the problem was they didn't really feel great about it because he had no money. He had no travel supplies, basically. Very, very low provisions to travel. And he only had a little revolver, and his clothes were just not appropriate for the trek in general. And they were like, this dude's going to bog us down.
Yeah.
They reluctantly agreed, even though they were worried, this dude's just going to mooch off of them the whole time. He said he was a guide, and they were like, well, I guess, the thing was, you didn't lie about that.
Yeah.
Because that means you're risking everyone's life, including your own. So they were like, well, he must be a really good guide then if he doesn't need all this stuff, and we have our belongings. So he obviously quickly got them lost, and they complained later, talked about him being greedy and lazy, and unfortunately he seized the whole time. So that's definitely it held him back. It caused problems for everybody. It slowed them all down, and his seizures really did end up getting they got worse too, but there was nothing they could do. Yeah. He was their guide, and that makes him the leader, essentially, kind of this group. Gosh. So the trip took way too long.
Imagine the numbers of, I told you so, I told you we shouldn't have.
I know. Yeah. I told you this guy was an idiot.
Yeah.
God dang it. So the trip took way too long. and the snow ended up being way too deep for the men that did have wagons and horses. They were starting to run out of their food, and their provisions is what comes up when I'm doing the research. And, you know, that's everything. That's the horse food. That's their flint. It's their matches. It's all of that in general. They're running out of everything. So they start eating the horse food to keep themselves alive, because the horses can at least forage a little, even through the snow. They'll find something. They'll eat pine needles if they have to.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, it took 2 months of misery in the freezing cold winters before they found some help. On January 21st, 1874, they found Chief Ure. His tribal camp was in Colorado, and he was known all throughout that area to be a really wonderful man, and he was. He really wanted to keep the peace between tribes and the new white men that were coming, and so they knew that he could be trusted. He was the leader of the Tabawash band of the Ute tribe. And so he actually helped make treaties between tribes and the U.S. government. So he was actually kind of a powerful person, too. So they asked for his help. And the crazy part was these poor men were so bedraggled and emaciated and starved. They actually scared some women and children. They ran from them. Can you just imagine, like you probably haven't seen a lot of men that look like that, and all of a sudden, these raggedy ass skeletons are climbing out of the forest.
Yeah, that would be terrifying.
Yeah, it's gotta be really sad. But Chief Ure, he welcomed them happily, and he took care of them, and he told them that they were welcome to stay for the whole rest of the winter until springtime, and that they would take care of all of them and their horses.
Oh, really?
And they wouldn't owe them anything, that it would be fine. And so half and half of the group wanted to go and wanted to stay. So unfortunately, the ones that wanted to leave was because they were going for gold.
Yeah.
And people were coming. And they knew if we wait, someone else is going to end up getting there.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, I get it. I definitely get it. This was the whole point of the trip.
Yeah.
So the very first week of February, after they healed from their minor injuries and recovered from their starvation, 11 of the men wanted to leave, including Alfred.
Okay.
And Chief Ure gave them all that they needed, and he gave them the best directions that he could to get where they were going. And he told them to stay by the river because it's going to be treacherous, but it's still going to be safer than going through the mountains with the snow. And the trip is going to take longer too, but it will be safer. So Alfred was not happy with that. He did not want to take the long way, and he convinced 5 men to agree to go with him to take the shorter route. Those 5 men were Israel Swan, George Noon, Frank Miller, James Humphreys, and Shannon Wilson Bell.
Okay.
The other 5 men took the safe way down the river, and they apparently all nearly starved to death in the terrible bad weather, and they would have died had they not been found by government ranch workers, which is funny to think of that, but you know, this is Native American land, so they had soldiers and military protecting the cows, and so these government ranch workers came across those men and in Gunnarson, Colorado, pretty close to where they were going. And they had to stay there until April. So we're now February 9th, just a little bit right after they decided it was time to go. Alfred and the group of his 5 men left for their trip through the mountains that was going to be 75 miles or about 120 kilometers. They followed the river for quite a while, but then they decided like this is just going to take too long, and the weather was still terrible.
Yeah.
So they took a shortcut up into the San Juan Mountains, and this decision was made pretty much because they were starting to run out of food, had ran out of flint completely, only had a few matches, so it wasn't going to be super successful. If they run out of matches, there's nothing they could do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they could like hand, but like the reality is that's hard for even insane wilderness professionals now. So they also they did not have heavy enough clothing for this kind of snow and stuff. Yeah, and I'm wondering if the tribe just gave them what they could, but they were not going to sacrifice the warmth of their people. But they also weren't going up into the mountains, maybe seasonally. They just didn't have it. I'm not sure. And they also did not have snowshoes. Oh, genius. Fine. Which is kind of like all of them. You guys made this trip without snowshoes or heavy clothes in the winter. So it's not even just Alfred. It was just like, what? Everybody kind of.
They were just trying to get there in a
moment as fast as possible. Yeah. On April 16th, so they've traveled for just a little over a month and a week or so. Still 1874. Alfred came out of the forest alone. He crossed a frozen lake to Los Pinos Native Agency in Suacha, Colorado. And the U.S. Native Agency, they called it an Indian agency, but the Native Agency was created like an outpost that the government had employees running there and some military soldiers, but mostly just employees, and they helped facilitate the trade between Native American tribes and the new people of the U.S.
Okay.
So it was a safe place, like an embassy. It was like an embassy pretty much. So he crosses over there. He's trying to get help. This is where they were all trying to reach, because this is where they could get help together. And they took him in and they fed him, and he started to tell his story.
Okay.
He said he'd been hired by the Five as a guide, and he got snow blind, which is basically your eyeballs are just burned. They're sunburned by the reflection of the sun from the snow, and that they left him behind, and he was given a rifle by Israel Swan, and they just left him. And he said that he, just lived on rosebuds and roots and whatever he could find around. And the problem is, the agency didn't believe him because he looked fine.
Yeah.
He was not emaciated for supposedly the 2 months that he was supposed to be there.
2 months.
He looked really healthy and pretty good. He stayed with them for 10 days, and then he wanted to go home back to Pennsylvania. So he started gathering supplies, and he sold the rifle that he had gotten from Israel for $10, which is the equivalent of about $230 now. And because he really, really needed the money. Because again, like, let's travel through the forest without a gun and go home. In Suacha, he got room at the Dolan Saloon, which was owned by Larry Dolan. And he said that while Alfred was there, he spent about $100. I'm not thinking that this is like a hotel. It's like a boarding house that's connected to a bar. Okay. A saloon. He spent about $100, which is about $2,200 US today.
Oh, wow.
And he offered to lend Larry $300. So that's like almost $7,000 in today's money.
Okay.
Right. He said that that the general store worker, he spent about $178 there, and multiple witnesses said they saw him with several wallets.
Oh, 5 or 6.
Exactly. He ended up at the saloon every day, drinking heavily, spending a bunch of money, and talking. And everybody heard a different story.
Okay.
None of the stories lined up. The town started gossiping. They were like, what is this drunk dude doing? He has a lot of money. He's telling some weird ass stories. So some new people came to town. One of them was Preston Nutter. He was one of the group that stayed back with Chief Uray's tribe. He found Alfred in the saloon, and he said, hey, what happened to all the other guys? He said, we didn't have adequate clothing and snowshoes, and my feet got wet. So I sat down by the fire to dry my feet and clothing, and the others went into the wood to find food and firewood, and they never came back.
Sorry, I'm like, hey, I can hear a bullshit story. Exactly.
So Preston didn't believe it either. And he...
Sorry, I'm like...
No, he knew that Alfred was just a crap guide.
Yeah.
But the thing was, he was their leader. You would not leave them behind.
Yeah.
Because again, you wouldn't lie about being a guide because you're going to kill everybody. You're going to risk everyone's life.
Yeah.
So you're not lying about that. He wouldn't have been left behind. The reality would be trouble happened and maybe one person's at least going to make it back. They're going to run back. Like, what, everybody got crushed in an avalanche? So Preston wondered why he wasn't sick looking. Because if he was lost in the forest for a couple of months, he did not look emaciated. So now multiple people are like, why isn't this guy all bedraggled? Like, you can't gain that much weight back. It's been a week.
Yeah. What rosebuds were you eating, dude?
Exactly. So he had realized, all these things. He doesn't look sick. He has all this money. He also realized that he had Frank Miller's knife.
Oh.
But Alfred said, well, when he had left it like lodged in a tree trunk, and he figured he just like forgot it. So Alfred, I pulled it out of the tree and I just kind of pocketed it for myself. Because he forgot it.
Light fingers.
Exactly, with his light fingers. But Preston is just like, this is weird, like these men didn't have a bunch of weapons. Why? He's not going to forget his knife in a tree. So it just didn't feel right. The other 5 men from the mining party that had finally reached the agency, the ones who had gotten lost and almost died, so they now had recovered from being taken care of by those government ranch hands, and they've made it to the agency.
Yeah.
And Alfred saw them, and he told them his story, and they did not believe it either.
Yeah.
There's no way. They think he's full of crap, and they beg the head of the agency, whose name is General Adams, to bring an officer to question him because nothing is adding up. Everything is different. This isn't right.
Yeah.
But he's still telling the story of the wet feet. But there's like little changes in it, but it's still, my feet were wet and they left me.
Yeah.
Before an officer could get to him, Preston and the other 4 men confronted Alfred, and they were going to take him to the agency themselves. And he was really scared because, it's like a mob coming after you.
Yeah.
But he was reluctant, but he still went. He was like, okay, I mean, what, they're going to beat the crap out of me probably. Yeah. So Preston told the agency everything he knew because this is the first time he's gone there. So he's told them everything he's heard, all his feelings, the thing with the knife, how he doesn't look right. And Alfred, seeing the other men from the party, were just like, he was so excited to see them, like so happy, like they were all best friends. And they were like, dude, we're not pals. What are you doing?
Yeah.
They demanded to know what really happened. Where were the other guys? This is just not right. There's no way. You didn't have a weapon. Why does none of this make sense? He had a revolver.
Yeah,
a small Colt revolver.
He had a
but that's not good for killing bears.
Well, he had a gun and a knife.
But the knife he wasn't. That's all he went in with was a crappy revolver.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And no more ammunition than what it held. So he told them the same wet feet story. And when they asked about all the money that he had, he said that it was from a loan in the town before the agency. And they were like, well, we're going to go find out. They went over there. They asked him. They said, no, there's no way. We didn't need to loan him money. He had a ton on him. And remember, a bunch of people saw him with a bunch of different wallets. Yep. So now they're getting more information. It's gossip, but they're hearing it multiple times.
It's information, gossip, or... facts.
It's hard. I mean, you're talking, it's visually seeing. So General Adams really wants to believe Alfred. He wants him to be the good guy. He trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. And so he gathered some agency staff members, the 5 men from the first mining party, Preston, who stayed behind, and then himself, General Adams. And they're all going to go sit down together. They're going to have a little conversation and figure out what's going on. Before this can even happen, they are called outside, and they go outside. It's just the craziest coincidence. They go outside, and some Ute huntsmen on horses show up carrying these stripped chunks of meat. And they said, this is white man's meat. Mm-hmm. And everybody is like, what is happening?
Yeah.
They say that they found the strips like up on the hill, not far from the agency, like really close by. So Alfred sees this, and he immediately like passes out and has a seizure.
So convenient.
And I'm thinking, well, the thing is stress. Exactly. Yeah. So it's stress induced. And so when he comes out of it and he is like, has regained himself and his composure, he immediately starts crying and begging for mercy and forgiveness. And he says that he'll tell everything that happened.
Okay.
Minutes go by. It's just dead silent. Everyone cannot believe, like, what is going on? They're waiting.
Yeah. And this is all outside, right?
They're standing around, and they kind of all go back in. They're trying to figure out what happened. He says, in quote, "It would not be the first time that people had been obliged to eat each other when they were hungry."
I knew it.
His first official confession of what happened between February 9th and April 16th of 1874. He said the trip was really hard, and they used up the food way too quickly because they needed the energy to keep going. It was freezing cold, so they went through their rations way too fast. And unfortunately, the wildlife in the area was really scarce, so they had trouble finding other things to eat. So after coming back from gathering wood, Alfred, he says he's gathering wood, which we're all like, this lazy piece of shit. There's no way he was. Because that's all everyone did was complain that he never did anything, and he just whined the whole time.
Freeloader.
Exactly. Yeah. So he said the 4 men were standing around the dead body of Israel Swan. And he was the oldest of their group. He was 64.
Oh,
that's
wow.
Kind of badass. That's old for back then.
Yeah.
Out in the forest.
And then to be doing that.
And being a miner.
Yeah.
So they killed him by blunt force trauma to his head.
Oh, okay.
So they just had, at this point, it's just a wound to his head. He's dead. There was nothing to be done, Alfred said. So, what could you do? But they butchered him, and they divided up his money, and Alfred took his rifle because, he just had that gun. And they stayed there for a little while. And so they packed up some of the flesh to take with them, and they headed out. But unfortunately, there was no more wildlife still as they were going. So they ran out of Israel meat, and they were starving again. Frank Miller was killed the next in the same way. He was hit in the head, and so they did the same thing. They split Frank's cut of Israel's money between everybody and Frank's money between everyone, and Alfred took his knife. James Humphreys was killed next, same exact way, separated the money. He didn't have any belongings, and George Noon quickly afterwards. Alfred said him and the last man, Shannon, Shannon Bell, swore on God that they were not going to hurt each other, that they were going to make it out till the end. But apparently, and they were never going to talk about eating people either. Okay. And so they were just going to say that the men died. They succumbed to the elements and weather and starvation. Well, while they had gotten not very far from where they were of that 70-mile trip by a lake, Alfred said that Shannon lost his mind and just lunged and attacked, and he screamed, one of us has to die so that we don't starve. And he lunged at Alfred, and this is where they realized that they were because he was going to hit him in the head with the butt of his rifle. So this is how people were getting killed. They were getting hit with a rifle. And Alfred hit him in the head with his hatchet for self-defense. Okay. He said that he ate some of Shannon's body. He took the money because it's, a lot.
Yeah, it's everyone's money.
Packed up some of the pieces And when he thought that he could go no further is when he had come across the agency.
Okay.
And so because of his guilt, he tossed the
meat,
the leftovers on the hillside really close by. So obviously the hunters found it, so that's like a chunk of the evidence. And the other 5 men immediately says this is total bullshit.
Yeah.
Because Shannon would have let them kill him to eat him. They said he was such a good man. There is no way he would have ever done that. And I mean, on the one hand, if you're starving to death, dehydrated to death, you know, you don't know. But the character of someone does kind of matter, I think. And so so General Adams decided to send out a search party to find and retrieve their bodies. So the 5 miners, an agency employee, a few agency officers, and Alfred as their freaking guide. Haven't they learned yet?
This guy's not going to guide you to your death.
So, and they head out. Well, unfortunately, after 2 weeks, there's still nothing. And at a fork in the river of the original path, Alfred said that he was lost. Nothing looked familiar, and there was just really no point. So they all turned around to head back to the agency, and on the trip back, Alfred tried to murder one of the agency workers.
What?
He had a knife stashed in his clothing, and he like went to bum rush him. And fortunately, it did not work. He was, you know, they arrested him, and because the agency officer, so they like handcuffed him, and that's how he got to go back. And Alfred was then transferred to the Saguache, or to the city of Saguache in Colorado, the same area that they were in, but he was jailed outside of town for his own protection. Because now the town was like, we knew it.
Yeah.
There was something wrong with him. He was crazy. So he set out there. Now, he's changed his story. He says that the blizzard happened, they got lost, and that they couldn't find food, so they had started like boiling and eating their shoes. Which that was actually really common because the shoes were leather. They would cook them up and eating that pea leather. So they all promised that if one of them died, that it would be okay to eat their body. Israel died first, but now he says it was not by murder. It was the elements and starvation. And he signed this confession. This is one of his several confessions, but this is the only one that he signed. So this is what he says is true, right? So now it is summer. We've progressed to August. It's still 1874.
Okay.
The snow has melted, and now the bodies of the missing men were found.
Okay.
The illustrator for a magazine, which is kind of funny, going back to like our scrapbooking episode and talking about when magazines came out. So illustrators went out into the forest and they found pictures of flowers, or not found pictures. They found flowers and they would draw them. So this illustrator is out in the forest and he's looking around, and it's about 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers outside of Lake City, Colorado. He finds all 5 bodies side by side at the bottom of the pass in a shady area of pine trees in a gulch, which I think a gulch is what we think of as a wash. It's a runoff because of water, so it's like it floods down. It was very obvious that the bodies had all suffered violence.
Oh my gosh.
The bodies were still partially intact. Israel Swan was basically bones. So they deduced from this that they likely all ate all of him. Because of the snow and stuff, the bodies had gone through like a refrigeration.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. It would be pretty preserved in the snow.
Yeah. So pretty much all of his body was gone between, the elements and animals. But the other bodies, Frank Miller had no head.
Oh, what?
And they didn't find it.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So we don't know, but we're assuming that the head was probably bashed in and carried off by something.
Oh, yeah.
I really don't know. We don't know. The others had stripped skeletal legs. So they had eaten the flesh of the legs. Mm-hmm. But they all had identifiable faces. Okay. So that's how they were able to know that it was them.
Except for the one without
Except for the man without the head. Yeah. But I'm guessing he had identifiable markings or maybe his still clothing. Mm-hmm. Because let's be real, you probably didn't carry that many sets of clothing with you on these trips.
No. Ew.
And so the legs were stripped and skeletal. They had identifiable faces, but now their bodies were decomposing. Mm-hmm. So the process had just started.
Yeah.
So that's how they got this like visual of this was back to back to back.
Yeah.
Immediate, because they were all in the same stage of decomp.
Okay.
So now nothing is adding up at all.
Yeah.
All the bodies are in the very same place, but supposedly they were killed along the trip.
Way. Yeah.
So what the hell is he doing? Taking the bodies and lining them all back? There's no way.
Yeah.
So both George and James had enough. This is so strange just to say it. They realized that both George and James had enough meat on their bodies that still could have been eaten. So there was no way that Shannon would have lost his mind and wanted to kill. They could have been eating still. That's so gross.
I know.
But they still, they wouldn't have had to get to that point yet. Mm-hmm. So when they searched around the area, they also found a pretty decent shelter.
Okay.
And then inside, it had all of the men's other belongings in it. Mm-hmm. There was also a really clear designated path showing that it was used frequently. And my mind is just blown that like they still knew what was up back then. Yeah. Like we have our detective skills now and they did too. Mm-hmm. I mean, even in snow, like he had worn down a pathway through the snow that over time of snow and melt and snow, it was still visible. So they're piecing it all together. So what they were also showing signs of their items definitely could have kept them going for a while.
Really? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The amount that was left behind, there was still, they could have tried more. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty sure that he killed them, stole their stuff, was living in the shelter for those whole 2 months, and survived off of eating them just as he needed to wait for the winter to be over. They're going to his cell to confront him and be like, look, here's all the bodies.
Yeah.
He's not there.
What? Sorry.
Yeah, he's gone.
He's gone?
He is not there. He escaped. They have no idea how. It was never found out who did it, how it happened, but obviously it had to have been a bribe. He had money.
Yeah.
So, and when people need money, and the story is just so crazy, and at the same time you're like, well, would you eat a person if you're starving to death? So maybe he bribed him with them. He had to have bribed somebody because there was no way he could have escaped. He was a fugitive for almost a decade. Because again, back then, he had quite long hair and he had some facial hair. Cutting your hair and shaving that, different person.
Totally different.
Completely different person. So he was found March 11th, 1883 by, again, these coincidences just crack me up. It's like, it's a small world.
Seriously.
He was back home. And he was seen by one of the men that had stayed with Chief Uray's tribe.
Oh, really?
Way back then.
Wow.
That whole time ago. So we're talking, it's been over a decade. And you're like, I know that asshole.
Yeah.
For sure. So Alfred was going by the name John Schwartz. And he had been asking around town to buy some supplies. And he was, the police were tipped off by that man, whose name is not, we don't know. And he was arrested. So now he signed his last confession.
Okay.
Shannon killed them all while I was gathering firewood and food.
Oh. Come on, dude. Come on.
I know it's not funny, but it's just like, are you kidding me?
Change it again. Exactly. It's like, maybe they'll buy it this time.
And he said he killed Shannon in self-defense by shooting him in the stomach.
Okay.
And then finishing him off by hitting him in the head with a hatchet. He said he built the shelter and tried to keep going, but the weather was too bad. So the pathway back and forth, the weather was just too bad to continue. So maybe.
Yeah.
He said he lived there for 2 months and he ate from the frozen bodies, but he was basically like only as much as I needed to survive because he hated it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. He had his very first trial in April, and he was found guilty of premeditated murder of Israel Swan, the first man. He escaped his death sentence, actually, due to a technicality that I can't find.
Okay.
And so in June of 1886, so he was already in prison for 3 years.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to go back.
Yeah.
He was tried again, and he was convicted of 5 counts of involuntary manslaughter.
Okay.
And sentenced to 40 years. Because, again, they got to charge him with something, but the story he told could be true. We don't know.
Yeah.
So, during his trial, local hunters actually said that even though that winter of 1874 back then was really, really terrible, there was wildlife everywhere.
Oh, really?
So in theory, he probably didn't need to eat them.
Yeah.
But he was so lazy. That's all I just keep going back to is like he probably didn't need to, but he didn't want to work that hard.
Yeah, he didn't want to go hunting. He just was like, well, there's...
Which, again, I'm like, well, that would expend your energy if you don't have a lot. But it's like eat a tiny bit of leg of somebody and then go kill a rabbit. But, So, in 1901, after serving 18 years in prison, Alfred was actually granted parole.
What?
I know. A local newspaper had been writing about him and an article about like how sad the whole story really was and that, his last confession was the believable one.
Okay.
And they felt bad for him because, wouldn't you do what it took to stay alive?
Yeah. And
I mean, I understand that too. But it's just like the character of his whole life. I don't believe it was, he killed everybody. He was greedy. He was terrible. He ended up with the equivalent of thousands of dollars in other people's money by making up a story.
Yeah.
So because of the scrutiny of those articles, and everybody feeling bad for him that, he was paroled, but his judge refused to pardon him.
Wow.
So he still carried the criminal record.
Yeah.
He ended up with work as a ranch hand, and because of our last story, just don't trust ranch hands. My last, you just can't. Like, you can't trust ranch. I'm just kidding. So he became a ranch hand, and he was also a guard at a Denver outpost.
Okay.
And he died April 23rd, 1907, at 65 years old. So he was only paroled for 6 years before he died.
Oh wow.
And I have one last little thing, and I hate that that's it, but we still really do not know the true story. Yeah. And all we have is his bullshit because there's no way. I don't know. I don't believe it.
The piece together probable evidence from the scene.
Yeah. And the thing is, I'm kind of maybe half and half. Like, maybe they all did kill Israel because he was the oldest. And they were kind of starting to starve. But again, there was still food prevalent.
There was
wildlife. Why wouldn't they try something else?
Yeah, band together and go find some rabbits.
Right, exactly. So in 1994, the bones of Shannon were looked at again.
Okay, so 100 years later?
They were analyzed, and it was shown that he did have a wound to his pelvic bone.
Okay.
And so, he did get obviously shot in the groin area. But all of the evidence has been studied and gone over, and there's nothing else.
Wow.
I couldn't figure out anything else. And I just think it's so crazy. And, well, I guess technically there's one more little thing. There is actually, I've seen this movie a million times, and not really, but definitely
enough
a
times,
lot.
Yeah.
And it's called Cannibal the Musical.
Okay.
And it's made by the guys that made South Park. So it's ridiculous. And hilariously, It is about this guy.
Really?
But it's a comedy. And so it's ridiculous because nobody knows what happened, they made up the most ridiculous. There's this song, it's all "Let's build a snowman" because they're all going crazy. And so they're like making best friends with a snowman. But it's Alfred Packer. And I asked my husband, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, do you know the guys' names? And he like said all the guys' names. I was like, holy crap. So they I think it's Matt Stone and Trey Parker, or like flip the names. I don't watch a ton of South Park. I do, but I can't remember. And it's really funny because oh yeah, I was right. Trey Parker. Oh, it was Trey Parker only. Sorry, just the one guy.
Okay.
And it's funny. That's so dumb. And I mean, it's sad now because it's like, that's a bummer, but it's just so ridiculous because I've seen that movie like the whole time my husband and I have been together. We've watched it a handful of times. And now I was like, what? It was so weird.
Yeah. I know. You really could, make up any bullshit story like he did. And it could be like, well, maybe... I think because the one body was more decomposed or like bones than the others, I think I think
it was a group effort.
Yeah, he was like the one they were like, we got to eat something. Let's kill the old guy.
Maybe he volunteered. Who knows?
Or that, or maybe he was like hurt. Dying and
they cracked him on the head. But he did have a hole to his head, so it was obvious that they cracked him on the skull. So maybe he was sick. That's the thing. Is like,
if he was sick, you wouldn't want to eat him.
If you're starving to death.
Oh, I don't know.
With you the flu, you're not gonna have like flu meat. The reality is too, is the human body is so foul and disgusting that I know this is crazy, but like if you don't cook it properly, the amount of bacteria that lives in seriously like the first few layers of our skin, it's so people will get, it's like a weird gross version of like mad cow. You get so sick. So this is the other part. I'm like, he must have saved the matches in the flint or like figured something out because he would have, my brain says you would have.
Maybe he just kept a fire going. Once you start it once, you just don't sleep. You make sure you keep it going. Because it's like that show Alone, where they're alone and they have to survive. And sometimes it's like, you finally built a fire and you just got to keep it going. Don't let it go out.
I get to sleep for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And also, the fire, the forest in bad inclement weather does not have seasoned wood.
Yeah.
That's a lot of struggle.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, it's just crazy. It's so crazy
because it was like cold, and I don't want to think about it. It's so gross.
I don't know. You'd have to. It should be probably because it was cold enough, and the bacteria is on the skin. My paper freaked me out. So through the subcutaneous level, I guess
I don't
not
know.
that.
It's almost like when you freeze meat to for a certain amount of time to make sure there's no like parasites and stuff in it. So. Yeah, I don't know.
It's all gross. My stomach's upset.
Well, he survived, but wow.
It's weird. The whole thing is crazy.
That was crazy. Good job.
Thanks. That was long. It was like 12 pages.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was sitting here like, whoa.
I know. It just kept going.
I know.
And it was the same thing for me. It was like I told you, the first thing that it'll be in the sources. It's a YouTube, and then I went with all the other articles was you don't realize this was like a 20-minute video and it took me hours. Like, unless you're an amazing stenographer, and I'm writing and I don't know shorthand, I'm not typing it up. I do the notes writing because this is what works for me. So that's why you hear the crinkly. I like it though.
I like it too.
But and then I just kept going and I kept going and I kept going. Then I realized, oh my God, like all this stuff has happened and I'm only a third of the way into this story.
Yeah.
Like they're lost by my second page of notes. It was boom, boom, boom. And it just kept getting crazier.
Yeah.
They all had so much money too. And were going to find gold. I was like, that's a lot of money. What are you doing? Wait till spring.
It's our life savings. I guess you just carry it with you.
I bet. Oh, that's so weird. Yeah.
I know it is.
Well, yeah, because you're crossing. You're not going to leave your money in the bank because if you strike gold, you're not coming back.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you may not come back at all.
Oh, yeah.
Take the money with you just in case.
Yeah.
Wow. That was an hour and almost 10 minutes.
Almost 10 minutes, yeah.
Whoop, whoop.
Recording, so.
You're welcome. Or sorry.
However you want to take it. So, with that, stay crafty.
And not crimey or cannibally.
Yeah.
Bye.